ANCA vasculitis is the subject of today's video. So as always, I'm going to break it down by starting with some real basics and then working up to what ANCA is and how it relates to vasculitis. But first, what exactly is vasculitis? Vasculitis, blood vessel inflammation. Now, the vessel itself isn't inflamed, it's the wall of the vessel, but there'll be inflammation going on in the cells inside the blood, if that makes sense. And ANCA vasculitis tends to affect a particular size of blood vessel, so tending to affect the smaller vessels and the medium to small size vessels. What's happened is that something in your genetic makeup has been triggered by an environmental stimulus that's led to your immune cells deciding to attack the wall of the blood vessel. That swells. It can become leaky, so you may get bleeding out of that vessel. And of course, if the vessel wall swells a lot, it could block that blood vessel and damage and starve whatever organ it might be supplying. So ANCA vasculitis being smaller vessels, commonly what we see is lung inflammation, kidney inflammation, skin disease, and untreated that can be serious and in the past even leads to death without treatment. But thankfully, we've got much better treatments now and better investigations like the ANCA test. Okay, so what is ANCA? It stands for Anti-Neutrophil Cytoplasmic Antibody. So if you've seen my videos on the ANA test and the ENA test, you'll know by now antibodies are made by a specific type of cell called B cells. These lymphocytes produce antibodies which we can detect using specific investigations in the lab. In this case, the antibody is against another type of immune cell called the neutrophil. The neutrophil is part of what's called the innate immune system. That is the inbuilt immune system that doesn't learn new things, doesn't learn new tricks. It's already fully built and made by birth, and neutrophils are akin to your frontline infantry soldiers. If you consider the immune system to be your military, then neutrophils are the ones you send in first straight away if you're in a fight against a bacteria or a pathogen. This antibody is against the neutrophil's cytoplasm. The cytoplasm is all of the contents that are inside the cell that isn't the other components of the cell. So cells are made up of what's called organelles, really tiny little organs inside the cell, each having a distinct function, and they float around in the matrix of tissue, of the fluid and tissue around us, if you like. You can't really call it tissue, but they float around inside this matrix, which is called cytoplasm. And these antibodies are directed against that. So we can take a sample of your serum, that is the fluid in which your blood is carried in the blood vessels. We can attach that to neutrophils and look at the binding by attaching further proteins that fluoresce. So when you shine light on them, they glow, and usually it's reported as a positive test or a negative test. And once you've got that test result, that might be the point when you start to panic and think, oh my God, I've got vasculitis because I got an ANCA test. However, as with anything, the ANCA test isn't perfect. So what does a rheumatologist do when they have a positive ANCA test? Well, the first thing is we do like to act relatively quickly. We don't want to leave an ANCA result sitting on the lab or in our in-tray for weeks on end. We need to investigate and work out the cause. You can do more than just knowing it's positive and negative. You can look under the microscope and see if there's a pattern where these antibodies collect. If the pattern is across the whole of the cytoplasm, we call it a cytoplasmic ANCA or c-ANCA. If the pattern is mainly concentrated around the nucleus, we call it a perinuclear ANCA or p-ANCA. And finally, there are some subtypes that we can do, some subtype antibodies that you test. And these are myeloperoxidase or MPO and proteinase 3 or PR3. Now, PR3 is associated with a C ANCA pattern, and NPO is associated with a P ANCA pattern. So now we've got the antibody, it's positive, though we're going to look to see, do you have an MPO or a PR3? And also, does that match the pattern of staining that you have? Because if you don't have an MPO or a PR3, chances are the ANCA is not significant at all and can be ignored. And if you do have staining pattern and these antibodies, but the pattern is a bit weird, if you have, for example, a PR3, but it's with a P ANCA, that doesn't really match what we're expecting. Okay, so what are the ANCA vasculitic conditions that we might worry about? If you have an ANCA and it's matching all the patterns and sub-antibodies, it could be conditions like Wegener's granulomatosis, eosinophilic granulomatosis polyangiitis, and microscopic polyangiitis. These are complex conditions. I should say Wegener's granulomatosis is the old name, but commonly still used. Now we call it granulomatosis polyangiitis. Once you have those antibodies back, obviously your rheumatologist is going to be doing quite a bit of investigation at this point, looking for signs of vasculitis, testing for your organ function, seeing if you're leaking any protein or blood from the urine, and if that matches for vasculitis, you're likely to be offered fairly rapid treatment. Okay, if it's not perfect, what else can cause an ANCA test? Well, you can get positive ANCA results if you have autoimmune thyroid disease. You could also get a bit of cross-reactivity. So if you have a really strong ANA, it may give a false positive in the ANCA test, even though it's not actually an ANCA test that's come back. Sometimes you may see this related to inflammatory bowel disease like Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, or after an infection. One interesting cause for a positive ANCA is cocaine use. Now, it's not actually the cocaine that does it. We think it's the cutting agent letrozole that causes the ANCA. But because cocaine users are usually insufflating, snorting the cocaine, they can end up with sores within the nose. And sores within the nose is one of the signs of granulomatosis polyangiitis. So if you're found to have an ANCA result, and you use cocaine, you need to be honest with your rheumatologist, because you may have some signs of the condition and you really don't want your rheumatologist to not be aware and to start putting you on powerful immunosuppressive treatments, because if you stop using cocaine, then the problem goes away. But it is a cause that I've seen on a few occasions in clinic. So this overview of ANCA hopefully gives you some better understanding about the value of the test. Yes, it's useful. Yes, it needs rapid interpretation. And by picking up ANCA vasculitis early, we get to start treatment sooner, limit damage, and improve outcomes. But not a perfect test. Not every ANCA means vasculitis. Any comments you have, please drop me something below, and if you enjoyed this video, give it a like or a share. It just helps with the visibility. Thank you.